This is the kind of moment that can drag an entire region into something far bigger, far faster than anyone planned. According to multiple reports cited in this transcript, Iran has launched a wave of missile and drone attacks that may have hit some of the most sensitive American military assets in the Middle East, rattling Washington, disrupting operations, and raising a far more dangerous question tonight. How much deeper is the United States being pulled into this fight? The most alarming claim centers on a heavily defended U.S. airbase in Saudi Arabia, identified in the source as Prince Sultan Air Base. That facility, protected by advanced American air defenses, was reportedly targeted in a combined Iranian strike using ballistic missiles and suicide drones. Open-source imagery, according to the report, appears to show U.S. aircraft parked in the open as the intended target. And defense says the strike may have damaged two EC-130H Compass Call electronic warfare aircraft, one of the rarest and most specialized platforms in the U.S. arsenal. And that is where this story gets even more serious. The EC-130H is not just another military plane. It is designed to jam enemy radar, disrupt communications, and blind air defenses in the middle of combat. According to the report, only a handful of these aircraft may still be operational. If the damage is severe, Iran may have knocked out half, or even all, of the remaining active fleet in a single strike. That would not just be symbolic. It could temporarily weaken a critical part of America's electronic warfare capability at the very moment U.S. forces are toward. The report says newer EA-37B aircraft have been moved from the United States and through Europe, a step analysts interpret as a possible emergency replacement effort. And if that assessment is accurate, it would suggest the Pentagon is already acting on the assumption that at least some of the damage is real. But here is the bigger problem. The military dimension is now colliding with a diplomatic breakdown. According to the source, Iran rejected a U.S. proposal for a 48-hour ceasefire that was reportedly delivered through an intermediary. Instead of responding in writing, the report says Tehran answered on the battlefield by increasing the intensity of its attacks. Other mediation efforts, including talks involving regional intermediaries, are described as stalled or deadlocked, with alternative venues like Doha and Istanbul reportedly being considered. At the same time, Iran is said to be putting forward a hardline list of demands to end the conflict, compensation for damage, the removal of all sanctions, the closure of U.S. military bases across the Gulf, guarantees that the war will not restart, and an end to Israeli strikes on Hezbollah. The transcript also says Iran is refusing to negotiate limits on its ballistic missile program. And one of the most explosive claims in the report is that Tehran is considering a new mechanism in the Strait of Hormuz that would allow it to impose charges on Hifzing a world's most important energy choke points. And this is why the rest of the world is paying attention. Roughly a fifth of the global oil supply moves through that narrow waterway. If the Strait of Hormuz remains threatened, disrupted, or politically weaponized, the consequences will not stop in the Middle East. Energy markets, shipping lanes, inflation, and global growth all move with it. That is why, according to the transcript, more than 40 countries and international organizations have called for the immediate and unconditional reopening of Hormuz, and warned that continued disruption could hit the world economy hard. Meanwhile, the battlefield itself is becoming more chaotic and more dangerous. The transcript cites Iranian media claims that U.S. rescue forces launched a search operation for the pilot of a downed American fighter jet, using Black Hawk helicopters and transport aircraft. Those reports claim one helicopter was hit by Iranian air defenses, and that local forces may even have captured an American pilot. Those claims have not been independently verified here, and the Pentagon had not commented in the source material. But even as allegations, they underscore how quickly the conflict is shifting from standoff strikes to direct high-risk confrontations involving that alone would be serious. But it does not stop there. According to the transcript, Iranian state-linked media say local tribes and villagers were mobilized, armed, and encouraged to search for missing U.S. personnel, with cash rewards reportedly offered for capture or information. If true, that would mark a chilling escalation, not just militarily but psychologically, turning the search for downed aircrew into a public campaign. The source also describes a barrage of Iranian strikes against U.S. and Israeli targets across the region. Iranian Revolutionary Guard statements cited in the transcript claim attacks on radar systems, naval assets, air bases, and industrial facilities linked to U.S. and Israeli interests. There are also repeated claims that Iran struck strategic sites in Israel and Gulf states, including military installations and energy infrastructure. Damage assessments remain incomplete in the source, and some of those claims remain instructions from one side of the conflict. But even with uncertainty, the scope described is enormous. And inside Washington, according to the transcript, the shock may be setting in. It cites reporting from Time saying officials in the Trump administration were stunned by the scale of Iran's response. The expectation, according to that account, had been a more limited and largely symbolic retaliation. Instead, the source describes an administration suddenly confronting the reality that this conflict is wider, deeper, and more costly than first assumed. One relayed in the transcript captures that mood bluntly. Officials realized they were now truly in this. That matters because the political clock is ticking as fast as the military one. The transcript says President Donald Trump is now trying to narrow the campaign while still preserving the ability to declare victory. According to the source, his advisors fear that a prolonged war, especially one that disrupts oil supplies and damages the global economy, could create serious political consequences at home. The report describes a White House searching for an exit that does not look like retreat, while still avoiding a deeper regional war. But the real danger may be what comes next. Iran, according to the transcript, is not signaling compromise. Iranian officials and military spokesmen are quoted as saying the war will continue, and state-linked media are warning of attacks that could be stronger, broader, and more destructive. At the same time, the source says the Pentagon is rushing to harden U.S. positions in the Middle East, accelerating the construction of more shelters and protective infrastructure at Allied bases to reduce exposure to further strikes. There is also another layer to this crisis, and it is impossible to ignore. The transcript says Russia has launched Yars intercontinental ballistic missile exercises in Siberia at the same time the Middle East is spiraling. British media cited in the source described that move as a strategic signal to Washington and NATO. Whether it is a direct warning or just timing with a message, it adds another level of pressure to an already volatile moment. Even European countries appear to be drawing lines. According to the transcript, Austria rejected a U.S. request to use its airspace for military operations related to Iran, citing its laws and long-standing neutrality. Spain is also described as taking restrictive measures. These are not small diplomatic footnotes. They suggest that even some American partners are uneasy about how far this confrontation could go. So tonight, the picture coming into focus is one of a conflict that is no longer confined to airstrikes and statements. According to the source material, rare U.S. aircraft may have been hit, American rescue operations may have come under fire, ceasefire efforts are stalling, oil routes are under pressure, allied governments are hesitating, and both Washington and Tehran are sending signals that point in opposite directions. One side appears to want an off-ramp without looking weak. The other appears determined to prove it cannot be forced to yield. And when both sides are making calculations under pressure, under fire, and under political deadlines, the margin for error gets dangerously small. What happens next may not just decide the course of this war. It could decide whether this crisis remains regional or becomes something the world can no longer contain.